What if the coldest room in America isn't a mountain cave or a walk-in freezer, but sitting empty right now under your own floorboards, and nobody ever told you it was there? Picture a July afternoon so hot the asphalt shimmers. Someone steps through a low wooden door built into a hillside, and in 3 seconds the air drops more than 30 degrees. No compressor hums. No bill arrives at month's end. Just still, steady air, sitting there the way it has for over a century, waiting to be remembered. That room exists because of a fact most of us forget after grade school science class. The ground does not follow the weather. Go down far enough, and the wild swings of summer and winter simply stop. The dirt holds one steady number all year, and that number is a kind of quiet inheritance, free for anyone willing to dig for it. I'm going to walk you through how rural communities in Pennsylvania and Ohio turn that fact into working architecture, decades before central air conditioning existed. I'll cover the science behind why it works, where the idea actually comes from, and the real reasons most modern homes were built to ignore it. If your basement has ever felt like a different climate than the rest of your house, you already have a piece of this puzzle under your own home. If forgotten engineering and self-reliance knowledge like this is what you're here for, that's exactly what NexReveal covers every week. Subscribing costs nothing, and it means you won't miss the next one. Let's start with the number itself. In most of the continental United States, dig down roughly 4 to 6 feet, and soil temperature settles between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, barely moving through the year. That's basic thermodynamics, not folklore. Soil is an enormous thermal mass, and heat moves through mass slowly. A June heat wave takes months to migrate that deep, and by the time it arrives, autumn is already pulling the temperature back. A few feet down, you're living in a permanent, muted version of spring or fall, regardless of what the sky is doing. This isn't a new discovery. Long before refrigeration, engineers in the ancient Persian world used underground temperature stability deliberately, channeling air through underground passages paired with wind-catching towers to cool interiors in a desert climate that could reach well over 100 degrees. Historians of early Middle Eastern architecture consider these among the earliest deliberate uses of passive geothermal cooling on record. The same principle later shows up in rural American building tradition, reached through necessity rather than imported engineering. Communities without electricity, particularly in parts of Pennsylvania and Ohio, built directly into hillsides. Barns with one wall dug into a slope, springhouses tucked half underground, and root cellars below the frost line weren't stylistic choices. They were climate control systems built from dirt and stone, working because their builders understood, empirically if not academically, that soil holds temperature in a way open air never can. Here's where it gets more interesting because the same principle can be extended into something more active, a buried length of pipe. The concept is sometimes called an earth tube or a ground-coupled air system, and the mechanism is almost embarrassingly simple. Bury a pipe at that 4 to 6 foot depth, leave one end open to outside air, and route the other end into a living space. Air moving through the buried length spends enough time in contact with steady temperature soil to exchange heat with the ground before it reaches you. Hot summer air emerges measurably cooler. Cold winter air emerges pre-warmed because the ground is warmer than a freezing outdoor day. It sounds like an exaggeration at first. What's actually happening is straightforward conductive and convective heat transfer. The same physics that makes a metal spoon feel cold in your hand, or a car dashboard scalding in the sun. Air moving through a pipe, surrounded by enough thermal mass, tends toward that mass's temperature. It's the same reason a wine cellar stays cool, and the same reason your basement is likely the coolest room in your house right now, without a single mechanical part. But that's only part of the story, because a poorly built earth tube isn't automatically a good one. Anyone who has looked into ground-coupled air systems seriously will tell you the real challenge isn't burying the pipe, it's managing moisture. When warm, humid air cools inside the buried pipe, its capacity to hold water vapor drops, and condensation forms on the interior surface, the way a cold glass sweats on a humid day. If the pipe is laid flat, water pools, and a dark, warm, enclosed space with pooled water is close to a textbook mold-growing environment. That's the failure mode that has quietly ruined this idea for people who tried it without understanding the whole system. The fix, documented in passive ventilation building literature, is straightforward. Lay the pipe on a gentle, consistent slope, so condensation drains by gravity to a single low point instead of collecting inside the tube. Add a filtered inlet at the outside opening so debris and pests can't enter, and the system becomes low maintenance for decades with no moving parts to wear out. That single detail, the slope and the drain, is the difference between a system that runs quietly for half a century and one that becomes a cautionary tale. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe now, because next is the part explaining why almost no modern house is built this way, and it isn't because the idea stopped working. Here's the deeper question. If underground air is essentially a free, renewable cooling and preheating resource, why did an entire country's housing stock move away from it during the 20th century? The honest answer isn't a conspiracy. What actually happened is a shift in economics and standardization. As mechanical air conditioning became affordable after the mid-20th century, home construction converged around one assumption: that comfort would come from a machine, not from the design of the structure. Once that assumption sat inside building codes, appraisal standards, and inspector training, an entire generation of passive design knowledge, earth sheltering, cross-ventilation, thermal massing, simply stopped being taught because it stopped being necessary for a house to sell or pass inspection. That's not a ban in the legal sense, but code frameworks in most jurisdictions were written around mechanical HVAC, and a house designed to cool itself passively can run into real friction with permitting, financing, and appraisal. The path didn't get blocked. It got quietly rerouted, and within a couple of generations, most builders never learned the older methods at all. Meanwhile, communities that never fully adopted grid-dependent cooling in the first place, including many Amish and other off-grid rural households, kept refining these earth-coupled systems because they'd never abandoned them. What looks today like a rediscovered secret is, in these communities, simply an unbroken tradition the rest of the country happened to walk away from. So, what does this mean if you're standing in your own house right now? You don't need to build from scratch to benefit. If you already have a basement, you own a shallow, unintentional, earth-coupled cooling system, since the below-grade portion of that wall sits against the same steady, cool soil. Encouraging air movement between your basement and upper floors, through open stairwells, or a small fan pulling basement air upward, uses the same stack effect principle that ventilated old barns and farmhouses for 2 centuries without a single moving mechanical part. Warm air rises and exits high, drawing cooler air in low to replace it, a loop driven only by temperature difference. With a crawl space instead, sealing it and covering exposed soil with a vapor barrier converts a damp, wasted cavity into a shallow thermal buffer for the floor above, for the cost of a weekend and a few rolls of sheeting. And if you're considering an actual earth tube from the ground up, the core engineering, correct depth below the frost line, a consistent drainage slope, a filtered intake, is documented well enough in passive building literature to be planned by a determined homeowner with basic excavation equipment. It's worth being honest about limits too. An earth tube or basement stack effect system won't replace mechanical air conditioning entirely in the most extreme climates, and it won't solve humidity on its own in the deep, muggy south without added dehumidification. What it does is shift the starting point. Instead of fighting from 95 degrees down or from 10 degrees up, you start from that steady 50 to 60 degree baseline the ground already provides, which can meaningfully cut the energy load a mechanical system carries, sometimes significantly, depending on climate and design. That's the real unglamorous truth behind the phrase people love online. Nothing was hidden in a vault. A genuinely useful piece of low-tech engineering fell out of fashion once it stopped being profitable to teach, and it survived mostly in the hands of communities who never had a reason to forget it. Digging into forgotten practical knowledge like this is the whole reason NexReveal exists, and there's more coming. Tell me in the comments what your house is working with, a basement, a crawl space, or a slab, and I'll point you toward the version of this that fits your situation. The ground under your house has been running the same experiment for thousands of years, quietly holding a temperature that costs nothing and asks for nothing back. Most of us just stopped listening to it. The only real question left is whether you're willing to go looking for it.